Hey, welcome everybody. Jeannie Ives here, along with State Rep Brad Hallbrook. And of course, the verdict is finally in. Mike Madigan has been found guilty on 10 different counts, including counts that were about bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. So this is really big news. There is no sort of like just dismissing the idea that this is just something that just happens every day. This is historic. This is very important. This tells the story of what's been going on in Illinois, not just in the last few years since he was indicted, but actually for decades. This is a man who has had complete power for decades. This is somebody who served in the state legislature for 50 years, somebody who held the state speaker position for over 35 years, somebody who amassed so much power that he was really the most powerful Speaker of the House in the entire country. He ruled his House, just him alone. He made all the decisions, and he was very, very proud of it. It was less about necessarily him making money, although he definitely made money holding this amount of power, but it was more about him holding power. And I think that that's really hard for people to understand. People mostly want to think that their politician gets involved for public service purposes, wants to do the right thing. That is not Mike Madigan. Mike Madigan, at the end of the day, was really all about power. And so, Brad, those are just kind of my opening thoughts about everything that occurred. But you and I served together. We were there during the time for which much of what he was indicted for was the legislation that we were having to be a part of, those discussions that we were a part of. And if anybody, and by the way, just as a way of background, most of the things that he was indicted over were considering the ComEd deal. And there were a couple different ComEd deals. Certainly the 2016 FEJA Act was probably the most prominent one for which Madigan was indicted over and for which these bribery charges are all about. So, Brad, you and I were down there. It was a pretty ugly time. You could tell that there was power struggles going on between Madigan and Rauner. I don't know if that fed into part of the corruption, but I just want your opening thoughts about this as well.
Well, he's finally got the title of a convicted felon. I mean, it's long overdue. We knew it. Everybody knew it was going to be this way someday. And I think this is, there's just any number of characterizations you could put here. You know, this is an example of machine politics. It's a foregone conclusion. Again, all the reps, all the senators, past and present, all the constitutional officers knew this was going to ultimately come down to this. I'm just waiting to see or hear the Dems say there's nothing to see here. Move along. Or will something change eventually? I don't know. Will it be business as usual, or will we see the needed reforms that we've been asking for years?
Well, you raise a really good question, Brad, because of course, you know, Pritzker's out there. Well, certainly if you've done the crime, you need to do the time, you know, and all that, pretending like, you know, he's conscious by it, cleaned his hands of it, nothing to do with it. I mean, this is laughable. This is absolutely laughable. And then I guess it's also interesting because at the same time, Rod Blagojevich just got, you know, pardoned by President Trump. And yet it's sort of Madigan that put Blagojevich in the big house to begin with by trying to punish somebody. So, you know, what comes around goes around, I guess, to some degree. But I mean, I'm not a Blago fan. I know a lot of people are. Don't count me in there. Not at all. Not a fan. And so I don't think Trump should have pardoned him, but you know, I can have my disagreements. But you know, these guys are now going to pretend like they had nothing to do with this, yet only by their money, that includes Pritzker's money, only by their vote was Madigan given this much power.
Yeah, exactly. And you talk about the amount of money. And I think the other thing that's really going to be interesting is all of the past and present legislators that have taken hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars in campaign cash from this guy. And so what's going to be their position? What are they going to say? You know, and I think the other thing that's kind of important here is all the damage that this guy has done with all the legislation, all the policies being created. I mean, it's so far reaching, Jeannie. Anybody that's ever had a connection with anything doing with Illinois, business related or whatever, they've been negatively affected by the policy that's come through the Speaker's office over the last 4+ decades. It's really alarming.
Well, that is true. He's done the dirty work for the public sector unions. They have been the people that he has been beholden to. They are the ones that he answered to if he answered to anybody. But he played them like a fiddle too, making sure that they got just enough of what they wanted so that they would keep his political coffers full and keep him in power that way. But I would agree with you. There's a lot of people that allowed him to amass this power without saying a word. And it does start with his own membership. Those people who stood on the stage during every inauguration and said, I vote Mike Madigan for Speaker. Now, there were a couple of rogue people who didn't do that. One of them is Scott Drury. Another one famously is Ken Duncan. Ken Duncan then faced a primary for which Mike Madigan put up $3 million and had a sitting president, Barack Obama. He called in a favor from Barack Obama, who's the president, to cut a commercial in a lowly state rep primary race. And lo and behold, you have Juliana Stratton take that seat, and she is now the lieutenant governor under J.B. Pritzker. It's all one happy family until somebody gets caught by the authorities, and then everybody seems to want to wash their hands of it, but they can't, and we won't let them.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point that you make there about Juliana Stratton and Ken Duncan. I think when you unpack all the genealogy of all these different things, whether it's a legislator, whether it's a policy, whatever the situation is, it all goes back to Madigan. And whether he's guilty on all these things or not, or whether he was able to be convicted on them or not, of course, we know that some of them were and some of them weren't. But all these trails lead back to one person. And, it's just a matter of whether they could have proved it or not. But I think that's what's really telling about it. And this is just 4+ decades of control. I think that's what's hopefully the legislature will get serious about enacting reforms to rein this kind of thing in.
Yeah, so his power was held because his members put him in that place of power, and then he used that power judiciously to get what he wanted and extract whatever he could from his members. Now, you and I were down there. We know many a time it seemed to us, at least it seemed to me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I know that we've talked about this before. It seemed to me that essentially his members were not comfortable going to him. They had to make an appointment. They wouldn't just walk in. And they had to have a specific purpose, and that had to be approved.
Right. And I think that's interesting. I never did meet with this guy.
Me neither.
Never even tried. And I've talked to others that have, and, whatever the hoops that they had to jump through to get there. I think that's the other part, was the gatekeeper in his former chief of staff that is now serving time and all of that. I mean, it's just... This is going to make multiple volumes if anybody wants to record this for history. I don't know, Jeannie. It's just mind-boggling what's happened here.
No, he's such a he was such an important figure. He was so problematic. I mean, Illinois Policy Institute did an entire hour-long movie about it. I believe you can go to michaelmadigan.com and you can view that movie. I think that link still works. But people were saying this a long time before he got caught with the bribery scheme, which, by the way, they had people on, I think, on wiretap for a good part of quite a few years before they sprung the indictments and all that. By the way, I mean, this was sort of a foregone conclusion. I think when the institution that you are alleging actually participate in bribery with them. I think when ComEd says, hey, we'll give you $200 million, you just keep us out of the investigation from here on, I think that's a good indication that they thought it was bribery. And fortunately, the jury saw it that way as well.
Right. Well, and you talked about the wiretaps and all that stuff's gone on. I mean, this has to be sounding some alarms in the heads of anybody that has had any dealings on policymaking, whatever the case might be. This has got to cause some of them some sleepless nights, I would have to think. I think it has caused some sleepless nights, and it's going to cause some sleepless nights. I don't know if this is finished. I don't know if it's done, as far as how far investigations are going to go. But I would think not. I would think it would continue on. But I don't know, Jeannie.
Well, I mean, I still think that our sitting, oh gosh, and I want to say Attorney General, not Attorney General, the Frank Martino, our Auditor General. Okay, I still think that he's corrupt as hell. I mean, in fact, I know he is. So, I mean, and people thought that possibly he was indicated in some of the indictment papers as, person X, Y, or Z, whatever it was. That hasn't come around yet. We don't know if there's actually more to it, or if they feel like they've gotten the big guy, that's sufficient and they're going to move on to whatever else. Look, there's probably a myriad of targets that have engaged in corrupt practices before. But Brad, you tell me, do you think this will make a difference in Springfield at all?
Well, I hope so, but Jeannie, I don't know. I just, again, I think the attitude is going to be, there's nothing to see here, move along. And it's just going to pick right back up, business as usual. I think the thing I want to touch on is what little reform, we have to take annual ethics tests and we have to do this or that. And I think this is window dressing at best, because bad behavior continues to go on. And I continue to say bad behavior begets bad behavior. So I hope, again, this sends some warning bells to everybody. I guess time will tell. It'll be interesting to see if any new legislation starts dropping here, what that sense is going to be. I don't know. It'll be interesting to read the room when we get back on Tuesday next week.
Well, it is interesting because Madigan's power derived from the fact that he controlled all the legislation. So anybody who wanted their legislation passed, who felt like they needed legislation passed in order to become to maintain their business structure, maintain the profit structure, as ComEd more likely wanted to do. AT&T was implicated in this bribery scheme too, although I don't think any of those indictments held water, and I don't think that he was convicted on any of those. I also have to piece through that, but I think AT&T got cleared of that. But regardless, everybody knew they had to get Madigan's blessing on particular legislation. So what that means is that the speaker held all the cards to whether or not your bill was going to go forward or not. Now, we knew that as Republicans. The Democrats felt that too. And there was never really a revolt from that mantra, that they knew that they had to go to the speaker to get approval. Now, Brad, I was just at an all-day school choice conference, and your Democrat colleague, Croak, forgot her first name. Margaret Croak. She was there, and she was speaking openly to this conference. And we were talking specifically about the Invest in Kids tax scholarship and how that died. And she said that the rule down there by Speaker Welch is if it doesn't have 60 Democrat votes, then the bill will not be called. So even though there were 50 Democrats, she said today, that wanted to extend the tax credit scholarship for poor kids in failing schools.
The Invest in Kids.
Yep, the Invest in Kids. Even though she said 50 Democrats wanted it, his threshold was 60, meaning 10 Democrats alone can hold back any piece of legislation. Well, they have more than 10. They have extra. They have 18 extra of the 60 because they have 78 votes. But there's no doubt between Republicans and Democrats, you would have had more than 60 votes easily to extend that. And so again, you see somebody else amassing power. And I asked her directly today, why aren't you guys revolting over this? Isn't school choice really a moral issue? When 10% of Black children read at grade level? Don't you find that as a moral issue? Because I said, you know what, you found enough to revolt against Mike Madigan's power. Why aren't you revolting in your caucus over school choice? Well, it didn't rise to the level of a revolt, is what she said. So apparently, kids in failing schools year after year after year after year, no matter how much money we spend, is not something to revolt over in the caucus. What my point here is that the power is still there. Nothing's gone away. Right. Now it's just held by Chris Welch.
Well, hopefully that message will eke out, and citizens and constituents will call for something different. I mean, especially last year with Invest in Kids, Jeannie, we've talked about this. You're a big school choice advocate. Over 24 schools created new or expanding their school choice programs. And we see that yet early in this spring across the nation, continue to see new and expanding programs for this. And when you look at the numbers, you know, that 75% plus kids can't read and do math at grade level. And some of these kids are low single digits that can. And it's just really harmful. It's just really, it's not fair to the kids. It's not fair to the families. It's not fair to the communities. It's not fair to the future employers. It's not fair to anybody. And yet it didn't pass 60. You know, if you get 60 votes, 60 Democrats, I was like, well, this is destroying the state. And wherever these kids end up in the future, it's destroying their future.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt. And the all-powerful speaker now is Chris Welch, who sends his own kids to a private school. So let that sink in. Yeah, it's complete hypocrisy. Can't stand it. But, you know, still, you know, going back to the whole Madigan thing, it was power. Absolute power corrupts.
Right.
And he had absolute power and he was corrupt.
Right.
I mean, and there goes Illinois. I mean, now that we've convicted, he's a felon. The top dog in Illinois for decades. Do you think our state ranking for the most corrupt state will go from 3 to 1? I mean, I think it might.
You got the documentation now, so
we've got the receipts on this one, so to speak. So, you know, maybe the University of Illinois at Chicago, which always does this annual survey of the most corrupt cities and states, maybe, you know, this is big enough deal to really push us to the very top. And who knows? It's really sad, though. It's a sad indictment on our political class. It's actually, I'm sorry, but it's a sad indictment on the entire Democrat Party that kept him in power. And to some degree, you got to blame the voters. Yeah.
Well, and it's, you know, as I've traveled as being a legislator the last few years, you know, people say, well, you know, as I travel across the nation, I don't go very often, but once in a while I'm at a conference here and there. And people say, where are you from? I said, well, Illinois. It's, you know, where our governors make our license plates. And they laugh. You know, we've got 4 out of the last, 8 or 9 governors that are, you know, have been convicted and spent jail time. And now we've got a speaker that was speaker 37 or 8 years, whatever the case might be. You know, he could have done a lot of great things for the state.
Sure.
But now he got this legacy. Now he's, you know, convicted of all these wrongdoings. Yeah. It's just unfortunate. I mean, one of the greatest states in the nation, all the rail and waterways and highways and everything that flows through Illinois. It's a great state, but it's been destroyed. It's become politically uninhabitable by these policy moves by corrupt Mike Madigan.
Yeah, no, and Wall Street Journal was really good at pointing that out this week, and big editorial essentially, you know, actually called you out by name too for the legislation that you had filed essentially to secede, you know, have certain counties or parts of Illinois secede from the state, become the new Illinois. And of course, there's that concept that some Indiana legislator has picked up and said, hey, yeah, we're happy to have you over, you know, Red Rover, come over to the Indiana side. Of course, that takes legislative action and congressional action. It's probably a long shot, to say the least. Yeah, it's a long shot. But I mean, this is the state of the state. And then the Wall Street Journal went down a whole number of different metrics. And of course, Illinois is near the bottom of the list. Indiana's doing great. And then our governor had nothing to good. You know, he couldn't actually explain anything other than to basically say that Indiana is full of a bunch of hillbillies that aren't educated. I mean, he essentially said that, and it's not true. None of that is true. In fact, Indiana for 4th grade NAEP scores, they're in the top, I think they're number 6. I think they're definitely in the top 10. I saw the chart today. Illinois is middle of the pack, right?
Yeah,
so explain that, Governor Pritzker.
Yeah, it's shameful for our governor to stand there and slam Indiana to say they're a low-wage state. They don't take care of their people. Yeah. And it's like, you know what? Today I would take an Indiana deal. I would say most of the citizens of Illinois would say, look, we want to be Indiana. I would think a majority of them would take that deal. But yeah, it's just shameful the way the governor acts. And of course, you know, I've talked about this and many have heard it over the last couple of weeks, the blustery comments that the governor makes in response to what President Trump's doing. And then 24 hours later, he has to walk it back. Hopefully his press person will say, hey, Mr. Governor, maybe we ought to hold on here before we say some of these things. But he seems to keep charging right ahead like like
Right.
he normally does. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you know what? Mike Madigan was convicted today, found guilty. And it's actually a conviction and a guilty verdict for the entire Democrat Party of the state of Illinois, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Brad. I really appreciate you coming on just last moment here, just wanting to talk about this because it is a historic and important verdict in our state and really across the nation. And so I just wanted to get your reaction right away.
Well, thanks for the invitation to be here, Jeannie. And this is going to be a discussion or a topic that's going to be discussed for several hours, weeks, months, years in the future. And, it's going to be interesting to see how the governor talks about this, how he responds on his governor's, the state of the state, his budget speech come Wednesday, the 19th. Wow, what a gift here on Abraham Lincoln's birthday, 6 days after Ronald Reagan's birthday. I think this is quite an interesting day.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks for joining us on this live stream. We appreciate all the listeners. Okay. Take care, Brad. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.